Dr. Prim Lewis, welcome to Profile.
Thank you so very much for having me.
First permanently appointed female principal of the Cartridge College since May 2018. You're a commissioner of the Overseas Examinations Commission, LASCO JTA Principal of the Year first runner-up, Justice of the Peace, former principal of Schoolfield Primary and Infant, made national headlines, by the way, with some remarkable gains in numeracy and literacy. We're going to be talking about that. You led Aberdeen Primary's transition to a full high school and graduate of the Jamaica University College. When you listen to that list, considering, your story about where you grew up and all of the different kinds of challenges that you've been through in your life, what do you think, first of all?
I think resilience. I think blessings. I think the song that has been echoing in my brain for the past year plus, He Knows My Name.
So you're from Jeffreytown.
Yes, rural community.
Rural community in Western St. Mary. So this is a rural farming district. This is close to Gale.
Yes, 5 miles out.
Paint that community for the viewers.
Okay, it's what you would see in probably one of the old storybooks, looking rustic, with people carrying water on their heads. You only knew farming. Persons around you farmed. And as children, you were in the fields with your parents, carrying the Irish potato or the cabbage or the bananas or whatever was in season. Of course, banana is always in season in St. Mary. Going to the field after school, looking after the animals before school. My mother reared goats and did cash crops, and so we were very, very busy with that. I lived between my grandmother and my mother, and I don't remember all of it, but I know that at my grandmother's house, we were, the children slept in one room. My grandmother and my grandfather were in another room, and then there's another room, but all of us were lying crossways on the bed back then, because we were cousins from different uncles and aunts, and our uncles and aunts, and my mother was living in Kingston, where they were trying to make a life. My mother was doing domestic work. And so my early years, I remember, were very influenced by my grandmother. And so a lot of the sayings that I have, a lot of the things I do are typically what a grandmother would do or say, not what my mother would do or say. And I can tell you, it's only when I became a teacher, much older, that I understood some of the parables that she used to use. But she was a person who was always talking in parables, and she would tell you not to follow bad company, and she would tell you that, show me your company, I tell you who you are, all of those things. And they resonated with me and kept me out of trouble as well.
So these are the earlier part with the grandmother.
With my grandmother.
And then your mother comes back with your stepfather as well.
Right.
And they start to set about, you go and you live with them.
I lived with my mother and my stepfather. Now, that was very, very interesting, because my stepfather would work out of town, I don't know where, probably Ocho Rios, Spanish Town, Kingston. He would come home on weekends. One of the things I remember was come home with a bag of chips and anything sweet for all the children. And he had 2 other children in the house. I was the stepchild, but I didn't feel like a stepchild. My stepfather was the father I knew, Ezekiah Williams, I call him Finko. And at that time, I would go to the Jeffreytown all-age school. And we used to walk to school, walk back, rain, sunshine. Hardly stayed at school for lunch. I would go home for lunch. I remember going home to my grandmother for lunch. That was really terrible.
To have to walk to school, walk home for lunch.
My grandmother lived about probably more than 5 miles away from school. And I would go home for lunch. And when I would go home for lunch, the worst thing was when you reached at the top of the second hill that you were climbing, and you saw what we call young smoke. Young smoke meant that the pot had either just gone on, or she was just making the fire. And what was worse than that was when you got to the kitchen door and she would send you back the same distance to buy what was going to be for lunch, right? And we weren't allowed to go to other people's house. We weren't allowed to beg. We weren't allowed to be out late. As a matter of fact, the only time we were allowed to go out was during Christmas time. Yes. And we were given a time on the road to get back home after we go out to enjoy Christmas.
So a very strict upbringing, a lot of hard work, but also a lot of fun at the same time.
A lot of fun. We had fun as kids. I don't think these kids nowadays are having fun because they won't get out of the house. Well, my kids certainly didn't get out of the house, but we were always out and about. Furthermore, like on weekends, we had to hunt for our own food on the trees with breadfruit and banana roasting, boiling rundown, that kind of thing. So we didn't enjoy being in the house at all. We were always out and about. I
want to talk about the place that you enjoyed when you're out and about more than anywhere else, which is actually school.
Yes.
But we have to take our first break on Profile. My guest is Dr. Prim Lewis. She is principal of the Cartridge College. When we return, a setback, then rebounding into secondary and after school, the early jobs and the love of teaching that is taking shape. And perhaps we'll get to the micro moment as well. Back with you after these messages.